The Oscar-nominated short documentary Island in Between puts a focus on Taiwan and China in a time of tension. I speak with the director, S. Leo Chiang. I'm Tom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. S. Leo Chiang grew up in Taiwan and moved to the United States as a teenager. He eventually became a documentary filmmaker, largely based in the U.S., exploring a wide range of stories. His film subjects include a Hawaiian ukulele master, an Asian American congressman, and Vietnamese immigrants in New Orleans. Leo was a producer on the PBS series Asian Americans and directed the 2019 film Our Time Machine about a Chinese artist who creates a life-size puppet trying to connect with his father in the process. Leo is a co-founder of the Asian American documentary network known as ADOC. His latest documentary is the short Island in Between, streaming from New York Times OpDocs. The film is produced by Jean Shen, who I interviewed on episode 130. Island in Between recounts Leo's personal journey to Taiwan's island of Kinmen. It's nestled just a few miles off the coast of mainland China. Military tension has hung over this border territory for 75 years, ever since the Communist Party took power in China and their opposition moved to Taiwan in a mass migration. In the film, Leo explains how this political climate was the backdrop to his childhood.
I sang this song all the time as a kid. We were taught that we Taiwanese were Chinese in exile. And one day, with help from the US, we would retake China, freeing the mainland from the evil communists. And Kinmen would be the launching pad.
In the early 2000s, relations between the two countries improved so that a ferry service was established between Kinmen and mainland China. Residents on both sides began to interact more. But at the start of COVID, the ferry service was suspended, and tensions are now on the rise again. If fighting broke out, how would the U.S. react? That remains a fraught question. But Leo's film isn't a didactic analysis. Instead, it's an effort to explore this place sitting at the crossroads of history. Leo is currently based in Taiwan. I reached him a few days ago by Zoom when he was visiting Los Angeles to attend an Oscar nominees event. I started by asking him how he first came to the United States.
I came to the U.S. at age 15. I actually came to the U.S. without my parents. I came with my younger siblings to live with my uncle and my aunt just to go to school for education. So it's actually related to the whole geopolitical situation. I mean, at that time, the families with means, they are always looking for ways to have another escape hatch, basically, especially for their next generation. And I mean, part of it is also because, U.S. and Taiwan always have this really twisted relationship where, I mean, honestly, I really consider, Taiwan a colony of U.S. of sorts, right? And then there's that relationship of being the colonial subject would admire the colonial master would, greatly. So our offsprings are sent to the U.S. thinking that that's actually kind of the end all be all in terms of the education. So
you're getting educated in the U.S. What set you on a path to filmmaking? That's not normally the goal for an immigrant family to send their kid into filmmaking.
You have it absolutely correct there. I have always been a cinephile. So growing up, I actually grew up in a small village, in the countryside in southern Taiwan. And, it's one of these things where my father's family and my mother's family lived on the same street. So I was always around all these aunts and uncles, and my aunts love these '70s Taiwanese melodrama starring Bridget Lin, who ended up to be this, Hong Kong movie star later on. But I just remember growing up, every week we'll go see movies, and then my uncles would go take me to see Jackie Chan movies, and my aunts would take me to see these, sort of like not unlike the '50s American, melodramas. So I love movies, but as you said yourself, being an immigrant family, my parents didn't exactly encourage me to pursue the arts. So even though I really loved it, I was considering it. I was also good at math and sciences. So I actually ended up becoming an engineer. I studied electrical engineer. Ended up working at Apple Computers for a couple of years. But I was always, sort of not letting go of the film part. I would volunteer at film festivals. I would intern for filmmakers. And it's actually a filmmaker I happened to be interning with in San Francisco who said to me one day, hey, the USC Film School application is due next month, and here's a letter of recommendation, and you have to apply to it. And, I thought, hey, why not? What harm would it do? I would never get in. I don't have a single sort of background in any kind of the fine arts or anything at all. And I got in. So I felt like somebody was telling me something, and off I went.
So you earned a love of film from melodramas. What steered you into documentary film?
I I think a lot of it has to do with my impatience of the development process for fiction films. I was also kind of a torture scriptwriter. I don't think I was a terrible scriptwriter, but it was such a miserable experience sitting in front of the computer, super critical of everything I write, if I'm lucky to write a few lines of dialogue for a whole half day. Anyway, it was not what I enjoy, and I love traveling, and I was always seeking these gigs that takes me all these strange places, and it just felt natural that documentary would be the direction that I would go.
So over the past few decades, you've worked on lots of different projects, your own projects, working as a crew member on other people's projects. When you look back on those years, can you pick a project that you worked on that feels like it exemplifies, the fullest expression of yourself?
Well, you see, that's tricky, right? Because I feel like every new film is like there's new revelations about what I could or could not do or should not have done for the previous film. I would say that the one, you're not supposed to pick your favorite child, but I think that the one that the one that is closest to my heart is definitely Our Time Machine, which is a film I finished in 2018 and went out to the festivals in 2019. I just felt like the emotional connection and the character development of that film was what I wanted to achieve in all my films, but that one I felt like I got the closest to achieving what I wanted to do. So the film is about two artists who happen to be father and son in Shanghai, China. Father who's in his 80s is suffering from Alzheimer's, so the son decided to do this full-scale human-sized mechanical puppet show, in hoping to collaborate with his father on it. But it ended up being an exploration of sort of mortality and time and memory and and also sort of a celebration of art making, and I think that so many of those things are close to my heart. So I'm super proud of that and super proud of how we got to where we got to. How we got to where we were.
Well, Our Time Machine also it's a film based in China. You were collaborating with a Chinese co-director on it. It comes at a time of kind of more opening up in China when whether you were coming from the U.S. or Taiwan, or there were these it was a period of new possibilities. It felt like, and I wonder what that meant to you. You grew up in Taiwan with a certain kind of mythology or demonology of China. You come to the U.S., get indoctrinated in a different culture that you can accept or reject. And what did it mean for you to finally go to China? And when did you make your first trip?
I actually was trying to figure that out. I really should do a little research and get a confirmation. I believe the first trip I made to China was in 2005 or 2006. I had attempted to move back to Taiwan the first time in 2005. I lived in the US for, a long, long time by then, a good 15 plus years. And I just couldn't get traction that time. I feel like, sort of being in this mixed background, the sense of belonging is always a big challenge, right? So anyway, I tried to go back to Taiwan, didn't work. I ended up taking a job in Singapore, working for this production company that produced factuals, basically like travel shows, these kind of half-hour TV stuff. And one of my projects was to do this travel show, like a hosted travel show in China. So off I went, up and down the coast, researching and then shooting. So that was my first trip to China, and it was kind of amazing because there was this sort of demonizing of China in my childhood, but we also study a lot of the history and the geography. So I was sort of, way more familiar than I should for somebody who really had nothing to do with China, on the surface, right? And of course, there's the whole complicated national history and the entanglement. It was very exciting, as you said. I think starting from 2000, maybe 2005 and onwards, for about 10 years, there was this moment of real excitement. It feels like the country's finally opening up. China is finally opening up. There's a lot of really incredible art that's being made, wonderful creative storytelling, and so rich in terms of the subject matters that people are exploring, so foreign to most people. And as a documentarian, it was like, a gold mine. And as somebody who is interested in visiting new places and getting to know people that I had no other opportunities to do, it felt like a natural place to be, because I do know the language and I do connect in terms of the culture and the history. So I did stuff like that. I actually ended up one summer I led a group of USC, University of Southern California film students, which is where I went to film school, and taught in Beijing for a while. I did like a series of short artist portraitures for a executive producer in Hong Kong, and then I ended up making our Time Machine. But things were getting harder, especially in the mid to 2010s, I guess, after like 2015, 2016, 2017, you could feel things changing. And compared to now, in terms of like now versus 10 years ago, it's a totally different world there. And as with all the friends and colleagues that you have, in the Chinese documentary circle, a lot of folks are leaving, or I probably even shouldn't be saying this, but I'm finishing a film where like I had to take my name off, and the director has to take his name off because it's deemed too sensitive, and nobody knows where the line is that we can or cannot cross. So it's been sort of a distressing arc that we're in the middle of, and hopefully not.
Yeah, it seemed maybe 10 years ago, it seemed kind of hopeful, and then that hope has really closed up recently. I mean, the phenomena I encounter increasingly, and I'm sure you get even more of this, is teaching in New York. I have a lot of students from China over the past decade, and the conundrum for many of them is, should I stay in the U.S. and where maybe I'm going to have more freedom to make documentary films, or do I go back to China, which is the place where the stories I really want to tell exist?
Yeah, I'm not even sure those folks are able to tell the stories that they want to tell anymore. Now that, right, like it's the joke is a not so funny joke, right? It's always like, well, you have to just make shows about food and whatever that just have zero sensitivity to anything. I mean, you cannot talk about feminism. You certainly cannot talk about the history of communism, in the last half a century. I mean, there's like what can you do besides I don't know. I might be sounding a little too down on it, but it just sort of makes me sad and to see, especially see friends struggle and people kind of making life choices because they cannot pursue the life that they've had. And yeah.
Before I get to talking about Island in Between, I want to ask about your experience as a organizer in the Asian American documentary community. You helped co-found ADOC, which today is an important community. Can you take me back to your early days when things weren't as organized, and what it meant to be an Asian documentary maker in the U.S.?
Yeah. Well, I think I do think that it took me a while to figure out the path that I was going to be on. I finished film school in 2000, and I started making films and sort of pitching around subject matters. A lot of them definitely Asian American subject matters. I was just getting a lot of feedback of like, oh, that the terms are always like niche and regional and, like how would Bob and Joe in, Kansas, that type of stuff. And I didn't really understand what that all meant. I just kind of took it as like, well, my film's not good enough or my story's not good enough. And maybe I don't know. Maybe they weren't. I'm not sure, right? Like who knew what the reason was? But I also started to see a pattern of like, okay, well, you have to, like, I see other sort of quirky, oddball ideas that did not involve, Asian Americans being made and being shown. So I don't know. I started to wonder about that a little bit more. At that time there weren't also. CAM, Center for Asian American Media in San Francisco, has done really great work over the years to really nurture and support documentary filmmakers. But they also had a priority of present representation instead of filmmaker cultivation. I mean, again, not that they didn't do it, but the priority was like, let's put Asian American images on screen. Doesn't matter who makes it, right? And then also for those of us who do some work in the US and then some work elsewhere, when we do work in Asia or elsewhere, then we're necessarily supported by an organization like CAM. So there was quite a bit of frustration. I mean, there were a couple of role models that we had and all looked up to and have been very supportive. People like Arthur Dong and Renee Tajima Pena, and then, Frida Lee Mak. These are the people that we kind of looked up to. But they weren't necessarily any kind of a structural space for us. And Grace Lee, who is my partner in crime in ADOC, we always tell this story. We basically went to film schools in LA at the same time. She was at UCLA, I was at USC. Our thesis films show in the same festivals, in the same programs all the time. But we just did not say more than 3 words to each other. We just never had an opportunity to connect until much later in like, I think 2014 2014 or 2015. We were at Sundance. Laura Gabber, a filmmaker who's a great friend of both of ours who made City of Gold, was premiering her film there. And we just happened to be sat next to each other at her dinner. And we started talking. We're like, why don't we know each other? Why wasn't there any space for us to build relationships and to connect? And that's kind of where ADOC was born. We just believed that even just the simple act of making a space so people can be together can already make a lot of magic. I mean, this field is full of really smart, passionate people. And if they have the opportunity to connect, to get to know each other, there will be collaborations and they'll do really interesting things. And so that's why we started ADOC in 2016. And we hope that that's what we've been doing, either publicly or behind the scenes, to try and connect folks, to try and make space where folks can feel comfortable, sharing both their professional and personal parts of their lives, and build relationships that will last for decades, like the ones that both Grace and I have made in our own professional lives.
So in that cohort, someone that you've collaborated with in the past and on this current film, Island in Between, is Chiang. Can you describe what your connection to Jean is and what that's meant to you?
I remember, it's so funny, Jean was on the board of CAM, of Center for Asian American Media, and I remember at one event, maybe 10 years ago, no, more than that now, a little bit more than maybe 12 years ago, she came up to me, she's like, oh, I heard of you. And I'm like, who is this lady? I don't know you. Why are you so friendly to me? And then I later found out, who she was and her background. And I was like, oh, okay. And then, the relationship went from there. And it was so obvious that we were going to be really good friends. I mean, there are other Taiwanese American filmmakers, that actually, it's so funny because one of my realization is that Taiwanese American as an identity is almost like a new, people are coming out of closet. People are for a long time saying, well, we're Chinese American, and myself included, because that's how we were taught, right? But in the last 5 years or so, a lot of friends that I've known for years and years and years, I'm realizing that, oh, your mother is from Taiwan. Like somebody like Stephanie Wang Braille, like Stephanie's Taiwanese American. She's not Chinese American from China. I mean, yes, the family originally came from China, but the parents' last stop was in Taiwan, so she has connection there. Anyway, but the two immigrant Taiwanese filmmakers in the U.S. that is really Jean and I. And it just from that simple fact, we just have this incredible shorthand and connection. We joke at the same jokes. We have the same cultural references that a lot of people just don't have. Well, not outside of Taiwan anyway. And we had similar background where we came we're kind of 1.5 generation, which is a term that means you came as a child, like as a teenager of awareness and a full life already in the home country, but now we're also fully immersed in the U.S. and do consider ourselves Americans, and we really do consider ourselves both Taiwanese and American, and I guess and Taiwanese American, right? So that's a really long-winded way of saying that she does feel like a sister to me. We kind of chat on the phone constantly all the time, both serious stuff and just gossip. And sometimes we talk about politics in Taiwan. Sometimes we talk about her family, my family, and then sometimes we obviously talk about work. I feel really lucky to have her. And I know I'm not the only person that feels that way. She's been, initially just supportive from the sidelines. And then, with our time machine, she got involved, and then she was also the EP of Asian Americans, the PBS series that I was very glad to be a part of. And then now with Island in Between, she's fully on board as the producer.
Before COVID hit, you had just made Our Time Machine. You'd been doing more work in China, and and you were in Taiwan, and maybe not expecting to stay in Taiwan for such a long time, except COVID kind of froze everything. Am I right in that perception?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a little bit of prelude to that, which is that we actually, my partner and I officially moved to Taiwan. We rented our house, our apartment in San Francisco in 2017 because we were Trump refugees. We were like, you know what? Let's try something else. And Taiwan was the most logical place for us to be because it was an easy entry. And I also, I had been working in Asia, because of Time Machine and other, jobs. And he, he's a theatrical set designer, and he had also been working in China, in Japan. So it felt like the natural place to be. Except that the second I land in Taiwan, I get offer Asian Americans. So I basically lived in LA from late 2018 through just like January 2020. At which point, my partner Dan and I were like, okay, well, let's go back to Taiwan. My gig is done, and everybody says, have you heard about, that COVID thing is so dangerous, you shouldn't go. Asia sounds incredibly, especially Taiwan, so, so connected to China. And it turned out to be the safest place on earth. I mean, Taiwan did an incredible job managing the pandemic, which is one of the reasons why people even, have sort of become more familiar about Taiwan in the last couple of years. That being kind of a threat that was always in the news.
So what did it mean for you to be really living in Taiwan after several decades of not being rooted in this place that's part of your identity?
I think that before this latest stretch, my my relationship with Taiwan was a little stunted, if you will. It kind of remained this teenage relationship of somebody, who connected to this place as a 15-year-old. I mean, that was as far as I got, both in my understanding, and in my relationship. Sure, I would go, every year, and sometimes I stay several weeks, but I was always looking at it, at an arm's length, and people were looking at me very much like, well, you're American, right? You talk funny, you don't understand the cultural references in the last 20 years or so. But this time, because of this, I mean, in so many ways, it was this silver lining of the pandemic for me. The fact that I was able to really reconnect with Taiwan, with the place. I don't even know how to really describe this evolve relationship I have with the place. It feels different to walk on the street. It feels different to to breathe the air and to see whatever it is that I see around me. My relationship with my parents certainly have changed a lot. I said in Island in Between that I spent more time with my parents during those pandemic years than I had since I left Taiwan more than 30 years ago. So all those felt like such gifts. It also really made me reorient and reprioritize my work life. I really do feel like that's where I'm supposed to be, and I'm supposed to be investing myself into telling more Taiwanese stories. And I'm in this position of being able to translate these stories. I mean, Taiwanese history is hugely complicated, and it's one of the reasons why people don't understand it, because once you start to explain, people just get confused. So yeah, I mean, it's the official name of Taiwan, which not many people know about, is actually Republic of China. That's what's on my passport, and people are like, "What are you? I thought you guys were not part of China, and now you're saying you're part of China," and then you go into this explanation of the Civil War and of U.S. involvement, United Nations and all that, and people are like, that's that's enough. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying that I feel like I am in this unique position of being able to translate this really complex situation for an audience internationally who I'm more familiar with than most of the storytellers in Taiwan. So it feels like that's the good use of my time right now.
So Kinmen Island, the subject of an island in between, what did this place mean to you?
I think that I'm getting this question a lot. I think people assume that I have a really strong connection to the island. I don't have that strong connection to it any more than most of the Taiwanese people, So that being that, we heard about this place all of our lives. It's this mythical place out in the middle of water somewhere really close to China. I didn't realize how close until I got there. And in my case, and it actually also, I think Jean's uncle as well. So my father served for his mandatory military service in the Kinmen Islands. And so he would tell me these stories, and Jean's uncle also did the same thing. He also served there. And the stories that they bring back from serving in the military there are scary stories. They're not fun stories about how beautiful the place is, how great the food is. It's about how their lives are miserable, and they're afraid that the mainland soldiers or navy's gonna like swim across the strait and cut off their ears or their heads in the middle of the night. I mean, that kind of stuff. So in 2020 actually, I decided to go with my parents, and part of it was because when you leave Taiwan at that time, you needed to do 2 weeks of mandatory quarantine after you return, and the government is really strict. Like, you have to be in a hotel room. You came and stay with the person that you're traveling with. You have to stay in basically individual cells. It felt like a prison. So the domestic tourism was booming, and we decided that, why don't we go to Kinmen, because Dad served there and he's not been back for a long time, and I was really curious. So that's how I even ended up there to start with, and what I saw was so different from what I had heard about. At least in my imagination, the place did not look like that or feel like that, and the people did not act like that. So I came back to Taipei, and then I was working with CNEX, the foundation and production company in Taipei that had been organizing the big the documentary pitching forum in Taipei every year that I've been involved with as a trainer. And the CEO of CNEX, Ben, had also just gone to Kinmen, on a separate trip, and he was really intrigued by it. So as we were talking, we decided that, well, this should be one of the projects that we work on together. And Ben, at the time was also really enthusiastic about a new initiative that he was putting together called Taiwan Matters. I mean, he was going around raising all this money from the tech sector in Taiwan, which is a big community, very wealthy. And he had raised a bunch of money and wanted to tell like a slate of Taiwanese stories, again, for international audience. And I have been working with him to develop some of those ideas as well. So it all felt like serendipity, that it was the right time to tell this story. And I felt like I was the right person to tell this story.
In the film, it feels to me like there's an effort to engage people without putting a political filter on them. So I'm thinking of a scene with two women who are talking. They're describing they haven't seen their families in 3 years because the ferry rides have stopped between Kinmen Island and China. And as I'm watching that scene, my brain immediately is trying to process, well, are they Chinese? Are they Taiwanese? And then I think the film is kind of teaching me to pull back, to withdraw that question and say, well, it doesn't matter. They're just, they're people who are kind of caught up in some of the geopolitics here that they didn't choose, but affects their personal relationships when they can see their family or not see their family. I mean, I wonder if you can, reflect on that of trying to separate human beings from the politics that enmesh them.
And I think I'm not the only person who is fascinated by stories on the border. I think that that's often the most interesting places. They're most interesting places to see the world, right? I mean, I think more and more, especially, in feels like anyway, maybe it's always been this way, but in the last few years, more and more, like the people are becoming more and more tribal. People are being forced to choose sides all the time, from the micro, even within the documentary community. That's face it, it's been super divisive. Some of the things that has happened over the last few years, that kind of breaks my heart. And then, in a much, much bigger scale, to all the conflicts in the world right now, right? It's like, it's either you're with us or you're with them. And if you're with them, then you're our enemy. And I mean, I loathe and I want to challenge and push back to that simplistic way of seeing the world. And then really that's the fundamental motivation, for me telling Island in the Between the way that I did. I really want to get beyond this geopolitical, like war games, chess games of government A did this to government B, so in response, government B did. Like, so what happened to these people that are, maybe have connections to both government A and government B? Like, what are their lives like? How can we relate to them? The what I've been told by the people outside is that no, you cannot, because they're the devil and they're scary and they do terrible things. But no, that's not the case. That's not the case. People can feel connections to both sides and still, like if as a Taiwanese person, I could love my Chinese friends and love, the Chinese stories, but still support the democratic system, proudly, that we have in Taiwan. And just because a Chinese filmmaker, is supportive of Taiwan and is critical of certain policies doesn't mean that they don't love their country. And So anyway, I think that the scene you're talking about in Island in Between the two, they're mainland ladies who have married to Kinmen. Even though they obviously still, feel very connected to their families in China, they're raising Taiwanese families. They have kids who grew up in Kinmen who are Taiwanese citizens. I mean that even though this is sort of what happens on this very small island, this is the same scenario in the U.S., right? Like there's certainly plenty of people coming from backgrounds that maybe U.S. would consider, sort of opposition or enemy, but who are very much, living in that same in-betweenness that these folks in Kinmen is living. So I'm not sure if that's the question you were asking, but that's, I think like that feels like, the goal was to not speak on behalf or to not, sort of make these empirical statements, empirical statements. I see this is my bad English. It still haunts me after, make these empirical statements about, the political situation. It's to make sure that everything in the film is filtered through either the personal point of view of the people who appears in the film or my own point of view. Like the entire narration, it's about how I feel, what my family experience, my fears and my hopes. And I feel like that's, to take the hard political angle out of it will make it more resonant for a larger number of people, which is ultimately the goal. I want folks outside of the region. I want folks who might not be familiar with Taiwan, to get it, to understand a little bit more. I mean, it's not, it's just a little slice of life, right? It's one glimpse into the situation, but I'm hoping that people will become more curious and want to find out more.
I want to thank S. Leo Chon for speaking with me. His short film, Island in Between is streaming on New York Times Op Docs and nominated for this year's Oscars. His recent feature documentary, Our Time Machine, is available for rent on Amazon and other platforms. See our show notes for links. Thanks to our team, series producer Hannah Nordenswan in Helsinki, Finland, and marketing manager Bella Racklin in Los Angeles, California. I'm Tom Powers in Montclair, New Jersey. Our music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Raphael Nehausen. You can follow us on Instagram at Pure Nonfiction and sign up for our newsletter at purenonfiction.net.